It's update time. It's update time. Oh, sweet, wonderful October. Such bitter, resentful September. 2021 years post-Jesus. They were 2 pretty good months for music. And like we always do, every couple months here, we're going to take a look back at some of the best music that came out over the last 2 months, some of those disappointing music that came out over the last 2 months, and just generally some of the more talked about records. All of these have full written reviews. You can check it out on the Music Corner blog, link in the description. And without further ado, let's get into the most disappointing albums I heard in the last 60 days. I want to start off this section with Halsey, the new Halsey album, which I wasn't crazy about, and not that I was expecting this thing to be incredible or anything. It actually disappointed me in a different way entirely, which is I can barely recall anything that happens or any of the songs on this record. I was kind of excited by its concept and by the pretty bold artistic choice to hand Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross of Nine Inch Nails production duties on this record, but what results is just a mixed bag of kind of forgettable and occasionally kind of generic, particularly in this new 2000s throwback pop punk sound that pop music is taking on. I don't know, it just stood out and did so little for me that I've already kind of forgotten about it. The biggest disappointment for me of the last 2 months was definitely the new Casey Musgraves album, Star-Crossed. After not being a crazy big fan of hers for a long time, she really impressed me with her last album, Golden Hour, and impressed a lot of people, obviously. I thought the singles, that sort of intro track and the lead single to this thing were okay. I thought it was cool that it was like a Star is Born style concept album about her real life divorce, but Jesus Christ, Casey just doesn't sound good on this record. The production is terrible, and the biggest Achilles heel of the album is just this awful songwriting. Like, tracks on here like Breadwinner or like that weird Tokyo, like Cherry Blossom song, they're worse than Casey's early stuff when songwriting was one of the bigger complaints about her music at that point in her career. So yeah, I really expected Casey to take this upwards artistic arc from Golden Hour and all of the new pop fans that it garnered for her, but this is messy. It's messy. Next up, I want to talk Meek Mill. This is far from the worst album I've ever heard in my life. I think it's a little bit forgettable, and that really is the thing. I thought that Meek Mill's last album was decent, even though I've been a critic of his for quite a long time. I think if he really leaned into his sort of hip-hop godfather type role and became worldlier and wiser in his music, he could make something really interesting. And when he does just that on this record, occasionally it goes over pretty well, but for the most part, this thing is a kind of forgettable, mostly by the numbers track record that doesn't feature a ton of what makes Meek Mill so unique as an artist, and does feature a ton of mediocre performances from rappers who really have no business being on this album. And finally, in the disappointment section, I've got to bring up Young Thug with his new album, Punk. I was extremely excited for this record. I have long been a big fan of Thuggers. I thought the single TikTok was great. Turns out it's not even on the album. I enjoyed his little acoustic performance that went viral, but as it turns out, that was pretty much the extent that he was willing to dive into this whole singer-songwriter trap star experiment. For the most part, this record is pretty standard trap, pretty standard Young Thug. I would say that even Beautiful Thugger Girls does a better job at diving in deep into some of the experiments that Thugger is approaching on Punk. And while there's some absolutely kick-ass, great songs in the mix on this album, it is bloated, it is inconsistent, it doesn't really have the strong sonic through line that Thugger's best projects do. And honestly, I am just happy he was able to dig Nate Ruess out of retirement for a new song. I can never thank him enough for that. My hair is still wet, but we're powering through it. Getting into some of the most talked about records of the past couple months, probably the most, or maybe the second most talked about album, Kanye West, Donda. The long anticipated, long delayed Donda, from the live performances. I was there, it was weird. Marilyn Manson, DaBaby, Chris Brown. Yeah, the word cloud for this thing is all over the place. But one word that it is hard to deny relating to Donda is bloated. This thing is long as shit, especially if you include mostly completely unnecessary bonus tracks. I know the little stems thing that Kanye has coming out soon includes even more bonus tracks and more material, even though there are already plenty of songs on the record that are clearly far below Kanye's pedigree. So yeah, while there are some amazing highlights like Jesus Lord where Jay Electronica drops one of the best verses I've heard from any rapper all year, this thing is just way too long for its own good, way too thematically inconsistent. It is clear that it is cobbled together and not quite, as I said, the pedigree that you might expect from Kanye West. One of the bigger breakouts in the punk and hardcore scene over the last couple months came from Turnstile on their new record, which has been praised rapturously from all over the place. All kinds of different critics, from the hardcore sphere to even more contemporary and pop music critics. Everybody that I have seen has pretty much loved this thing, which is why I thought it was weird that I was just okay. I came off thinking it was good, maybe not great. It's short, and there were some songs that I thought were pretty huge misses. But with that being said, pretty much all of my favorite Turnstile songs, my new favorite Turnstile songs, show up on this record. The highlights are riveting, they are furiously intense, and so much fun. I must have listened to Blackout 100 times since it first came out. Kick-ass, one of the best rock songs of the year. If post-hardcore, that new style of post-hardcore, or just contemporary hardcore punk music is your thing, you definitely want to check this thing out because there are going to be some great highlights for you. Next up to bat, it's Drake, our certified lover boy. Probably one of the more controversial albums to come out in recent memory, because whenever Drake does anything, a lot of people, climb on board to hate on it, and I certainly don't think this is the worst thing Drake has ever released. I was surprised by just how many of these songs I was really excited to come back to, from the very expansive and kind of introspective emotional opener to bangers with great features like the Lil Wayne song and the Travis Scott song that end up deep in the track list. Yes, this thing is bloated, but it certainly has its highlights, and if you trim some of the fat, you really could put together one of the best Drake projects in years, like since If You're Reading This Good, which is surprising, of course, because it's a Drake record in 2021. It is way too long. It has its flaws. It has songs that are just worse versions of other songs on the record, but I was really genuinely surprised to be able to see the through line, the good stuff in the mix on this record, and I came away from it thinking, it's half decent. Speaking of half decent, I responded kind of similarly to the new Lil Nas X album, Montero, his debut album. I got a lot of shit for saying that I wasn't crazy about Old Town Road as a song and as a phenomenon, and I was even harsher to Lil Nas X's debut EP that came out last year or the year before, I don't even remember. This is all in spite of the fact that he is one of my favorite celebrities in the entire world, and if you do not follow him on Twitter, you're missing out. The dude is hilarious. He always comes off as super genuine and super heartfelt. He's pretty much the perfect pop star for my generation. And with that being said, the singles released in the lead up to this record, particularly Industry Baby with Jack Harlow, which has become easily my favorite Lil Nas X song to date, they built up to a pretty good debut, honestly. My expectations were not sky high. I didn't expect him to set the world on fire, but he really did pin a number of pretty good pop songs. He shows off his versatility on this record, particularly in the back half, where he seems to really be comfortable stepping outside his comfort zone and trying new things. And while they don't always work, this is the first step on his journey to really honing what makes him so unique, so encapsulating as an artist. I think we're going to look back on this as an important record once he has done something bigger and better down the road. In the indie scene, the new Sufjan Stevens and Angelo De Augustine album is pretty good. It is damn good. It might be the best thing Sufjan has released in a long time, and I really enjoyed that Planetarium record, so that's saying something. I love the stripped back instrumentation. It feels like such a return to form for Sufjan. I love the movie concepts that run throughout this album. I think it is charming and helps set a lot of these songs apart. I think the record's biggest weakness is that its quieter tracks tend to blend together, tend to get muddled, don't necessarily feel like they have the impact of its brightest moments. But when all is said and done, I think this is a pretty good and pretty consistent collection of tracks that anyone who likes indie or indie folk has probably already heard. If not, what are you doing? Get on this shit right now. And while we're in the hive mind of the debut album, jumping back to Lil Nas X, we also heard the debut album of one Baby Keem, which has surprised me in just how many people are talking about and discussing this record. No thanks to the memality of the two Kendrick Lamar tracks that show up on this record. Just kidding, that's been like 99% of the buzz. But yes, top of the morning aside, this thing's pretty good. It has its whiffs, it has its misses, these really poorly thought out experiments, but what I am just really excited about and really engaged with in the record is Baby Keem's willingness to do weird shit that other rappers will not do. He has that unique voice. He is willing to use it and stretch it in cool and inventive ways. He is taking on song structures and song topics that are unconventional by modern trap standards. For him to be willing to do all of this in a debut, I think it's a set of tracks that shows what sets him apart, and I think he's going to go on to hone some of those unique facets and continue to expand his world of collaborators, of rappers and producers, which is already incredibly impressive for a debut album, to just make some really great shit in the future. This record really did impress me. Next up, The World is a Beautiful Place, and I Am No Longer Afraid to Die. Their new album, Illusory Walls, I was pretty hyped for this thing. I have loved just about all of this band's albums up to this point. I anticipated this one being good with the singles. It wasn't quite as good as I thought it was gonna be. Some of the deep cuts in the first half of the record were a little taxing, a little bit on the long side for me, but when they really kicked it into high gear with the long tracks, the last two songs on this record being extensively long, they really kicked ass, particularly on the closer. This record is saved by the fantastic final half-hour run or so that they go on at the very end. It is genre blending, it is emotional, it is exciting, and I recommend it even if not every moment will be as heart-poundingly engaging. And just this week, Lana Del Rey, Blue Bannisters, the new album, her second album of this year. It's okay. I like it. There are plenty of good songs here that are already making an impression on her fans and the general pop and indie music audiences that she always appeals to. The biggest letdown I have from the record is that the second half of it is really obviously just a bunch of songs she's had lying around for a long time. And some of them, you can tell, they sound a lot of these tracks like they're coming from the Ultraviolence era lyrically, even if she is updating the recording and instrumentation to her modern sound. I wouldn't say that this set of tracks fits together in the way that most of her albums do, and the result is just okay. She's relying on her talent as a songwriter, her indelible vocals to sort of coast on this record, and while she does coast to a number of great tracks like Dealer and Arcadia, for the most part, it's not her best work. And before we're done, 2 albums that the reviews are not out for. I'm still writing them, but I think by the time this video drops, they'll be out. The new Parquet Courts record, which is solid. It sees the band going in a more reserved, more indirect methodology to their music, but I still think there are some highlights. I still think it shows off what makes them so good. And JPEG Mafia, his new album, he is really at the point where he's just throwing everything he can think of into a record, and it works pretty well most of the time. If you're a fan of either of these 2 artists, give these records a shot, because I think you'll like them even if it's not the best work from either of them. Speaking of best work, let's talk about the best albums and EP that we heard over the last 2 months, starting with the big one, the big fish, obviously. If you only listen to one album that I talk about today, let it be the new Little Simz album, Sometimes I Might Be Introvert. This thing is incredible. It is a benchmark of hip-hop, a high point of thought, provoking, versatile, and compelling through and through rap music. Simbi is so impressive in her lyricism and her vocal performances. There are some flat out amazing features on this album, featured vocalists who do such a good job, but it is all about Simz as a storyteller, as an MC, and as a world builder in this whole almost fairy tale style theatrical concept she lays out across this record. It is amazing. It is amazing. Listen to it. That's all I have to say. Next up, the new Low album. Once legendary slowcore act Low, now dabbling in the worlds of experimental rock, noise rock. There are some extremely loud and thick passages of noise on this new record. If experimental rock is your kind of thing, you have to hear this. The songwriting is so inventive and so cool. The sounds that they are playing with are so harsh and intense, but the way that they weave them into these beautiful melodies is so unique. I've never really heard anything like this. I think it's the best record that Low has released in a long, long time, and this is coming from somebody who is a die-hard, obsessed slowcore fan. Injury Reserve released their new album By the Time I Get to Phoenix, which I think we all knew would be a very tough and very earnest listen with the unexpected passing of Groggs last year, but I didn't anticipate just how boldly experimental this thing was going to be. From the production, where Parker Corey is once again killing it on these beats, to the really unconventional verse structures and song structures that the band approaches these tracks with, it is less the somber, reserved ode to a friend that I was anticipating, and more a dark and brash record full of songs that even blur the lines between whether it's still even hip-hop or not. There is just a ton going on here. It sounds years and years ahead of its time. It is just remarkably refreshing and inventive and dark, occasionally meditative, and abstract. We'll call it abstract. If you like your hip-hop really off the wall, you're going to find some really, really cool stuff in here. And I'm going to go ahead and win my worst at pronouncing names trophy. This new record from Nala Seinfro. I really don't know how to pronounce her name. I tried to find it, and even that was inconsistent. I genuinely, literally don't know, but I tried. I'm sorry. This is such a cool record that fuses jazz and lounge music with ambient music and soundscapes. It is so fragile, so touching, but really, really beautiful. I really enjoyed it. It's a record I found myself coming back to over and over and over again after the past month. It is so soothing, but so, I don't know, texturally diverse and intimate. There really is a lot going on here, a lot worth hearing. Fans of ambient music, even though this thing is more involved than your conventional tastes may be, I certainly know that was a barrier for me going into the album. If you really dig deep and look for the soundscapes and textures that Nala is playing with, there is some kick-ass awesome stuff here. Highly recommend this record. The only EP I'm going to talk about today is this Clarence Clarity EP, although I did review some other pretty good EPs worth checking out, like Gorillaz and The Alchemist, but this Clarence Clarity record kicks ass. It's so good, and I just continue to be floored by everything that he does. Wherever it lands on the scale between zany electronica and conventional commercial electropop, it is always just as exciting, just as riveting, just as fun. These tracks are no different. I think there's an intro song, but the first two really good songs, particularly Obsessed, is just hitting, and they just work. It's some of my favorite stuff I have heard all year. Go check it out. Then we've got Mr. James Blake, Friends Who Break Your Heart. No surprise whatsoever. James Blake has always made great shit. His voice continues to be the best tool in his musical catalog, but the versatile production and style of songs that appear on this record are also incredibly impressive. James and his collaborators line up and knock down pretty much every single experiment they try. It feels routine at this point, dumping critical praise onto James Blake, but he continues to deserve it. For like the fifth time in his career, across 5 albums, he has released what I think is one of the best albums of the year. And finally, on that same day, in the last record, we're going to talk about the new Bad Bad Not Good album, Talk Memory. Was pretty excited about this one, even though I didn't love the second single, although I really love the first single, and I know that there were a lot of people in that boat. Stick with the record, give it a shot. I think you'll find that the longer jazz compositions here are very rewarding, very fulfilling. These guys have come a long way from playing like Zelda and Kanye and Earl Sweatshirt covers. They are really studying and indebted to the classics. This is the most classic their jazz sound has sounded in their entire career, and it's clear that they do their homework. These guys are really talented musicians, playing off of each other and experimenting in a really fun way. Any jazz head is going to find something to like about this record. I certainly know I did. And that's that. Bing bang boom. A bunch of records to listen to, a bunch of ones maybe to not listen to. Keep your eye on the Music Corner blog. Again, I'll link it in the description. Gonna keep writing reviews. Gonna review plenty of hopefully good music over the next 2 months. Probably gonna drop something new on the YouTube channel, maybe a new episode of Spotlight, maybe a new discography rank, and then at the end of the year, keep your eyes on the blog, starting Christmas Day. 7 days, 7 lists encapsulating all of the best music to come out in 2021. It is an exciting time, and yeah.